We're going under the hood with Dr. Sunshine, where we explore topics that are relevant to STEM professionals with intersecting identities. Thank you for listening. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to Under the Hood. This is an online community for aspiring, current, or retired STEM students and professionals. It's also a space for the friends and family of STEM people where you can hear firsthand accounts of the behind-the-scenes experiences of those you care about who have dedicated their working lives to careers in STEM. So we're back again today with another chat with my dear friend and colleague, Professor Haofei Yu. Hi, Haofei.
I
Right, so I'm very excited to talk with Professor Yu about his educational journey and some questions that are specific to the international community. But let's introduce Professor Yu. So he's an assistant professor of civil, environmental, and construction engineering at the University of Central Florida in Orlando, Florida. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree in environmental engineering from Hangzhou Dianzi University and a Master of Science degree in environmental engineering from the University of Shanghai for science and technology, and finally a Ph.D. in environmental health from the University of South Florida. After conducting postdoctoral research at Pacific Northwest National Lab and the Georgia Institute of Technology, Professor Yu launched his faculty career, where he is now the principal investigator of the Air Quality Research Lab at UCF. His research interests are pollutant emission estimation, air quality modeling, air pollution measurements, and exposure and health impact estimation. Yeah, so very impressive.
thanks.
And yeah, and I'm looking forward to talking more about your journey. So
Thanks.
we'll,
Happy to share.
yeah, thank you for being here. So we'll jump right in. So, Hafe, can you tell us a little bit about your motivations for studying environmental health in the US?
Sure. So it's my background is environmental engineering. So when I was starting my undergrad back in China, like about 20 something years ago, so we're always saying that, I can't believe it's over 20 years. So there is a saying, basically saying the 21st century is going to be environmental engineering is going to play a major role. So that's why I went to environmental engineering major. And for environmental health, I would say it's a somewhat a happy coincidence. So when I was looking for a PhD position in the United States, I came across my advisor, Dr. Amy Stewart at USF, South Florida. So she was a joint appointment in both engineering and public health. So she asked me if I'm interested in environmental health. I look over because my original target is environmental engineering. I look over her research spectrum and find it quite interesting. And plus, the ultimate goal of environmental engineering is to serve environmental health. So I decided to join her in college public health. That's how I end up there. So, but it has been turned out pretty good so far.
Well, that's interesting. So you were in the engineering family by way of
Yeah,
your advisor. And I agree. That's a great nexus to study across.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's a very different perspective, but yeah.
wonderful. So my next question is, were there any benefits to having educational perspectives from both China and the US? And if so, did that enhance your graduate and postdoctoral research?
I would say definitely yes. So how the graduate school operates is there are some similarities and there are some differences between US and China, of course. So my personal experience is that as an undergrad student in China, I did some research, at two different universities actually. So my personal experience is in the United States all the graduate students are encouraged to be more active, to actually to own the project, to take the project as their own, to push by themselves. So you have a more active role in the project. And I found that's quite interesting because when you went over the basically the worker relationship versus you took on the project as your own, it's definitely opened your eyes. So I would say it makes me more appreciate the because it fits different people, but I do personally more appreciate the system here.
Okay. So, as an impromptu question, do you feel like you were prepared for that take on the project work ethic here as a student?
Honestly, not really, because I mean, I think it happened to most students. I mean, from all the students I interacted, um, so for all the students, well, at that time they're all kids, right? So just freshly graduates from undergrad. The whole life is about learning, reading books, learning about different concepts, memorizing different equations, things like this. But suddenly you have to take over a project. It's a big transition, but it's definitely a good transition. It takes some time, but I would say it's going to be difficult for a student to be fully prepared to do that. But it's good.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It
No
is a big
problem.
responsibility to transition from receiving information, memorization, and then taking on responsibility for your own project.
It is
Okay.
a tremendously big transition.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And so now I'm going to ask about your research.
Mhm.
And I find it to be really interesting. Um, as background, Professor Yu, Haofei and I have a long-standing collaborative relationship in the area of how mobility impacts air pollution exposure. I was inspired by your work, and with that, I'd like to ask, in with respect to individual mobility for air pollution exposure, how can cellular technology potentially transform exposure health studies?
Right, I'm happy to talk about it actually. It's quite a fascinating topic. So as you know, one of the major issues in air pollution exposure is basically human moves all the time. Um, we know air pollution causes health impacts, but we want to know, there are millions of different diseases. One of the major questions is, does exposed air pollution cause this disease? Because sometimes the disease association is there, but rather it's not as drastic as apparent. It's like it touches you die. No, not that drastic. But we still want to know, does it impact? For example, I'm interested in one of the health outcome I'm already interested is basically pregnancy outcomes. Does exposure to air pollution increase some sort of like birth defect, the burst, some birth illness, something like that? But it's a difficult topic because human moves all the time. When air pollution concentration changes all the time. You constantly hear people like stay in the suburbs where air pollution concentration is relatively low, but they work in downtown where air pollution concentration is high. So you have to take account the difference in the pollution concentration at different locations, how they move at different locations. It's difficult because you need to have data, and that data is pretty difficult to collect. The cellular technology is very interesting. It fits well here is simply because you have everybody has phones, whether it's a smartphone, whether it's a black and white, just regular Nokia 110 phone. So it's everybody have one of these. And if you have one of these, there's some digital tricks, digital footprint that is available and can be used to basically to go back to see where they are with proper, of course, protection of privacy, of course. So, some of the, as in our research, we found that some of the data can go back to many, many months. Now, if you think about it, so for some of in the case of pregnancy outcomes, some of the, when the pollution takes impact on the fetus, it happens very early in the pregnancy, sometime in the first trimester, right? If we want to go back to the first trimester, we're talking about half a year ago. It's hard because I don't even remember where I was yesterday, right? If we talk about half a year ago, it's really difficult to get the data. But using the cellular technology, we may be able to take a peek where this person was and how they move around from a long time ago. With those of data and combined with pollution simulation, something like that, with some ready to use information, we can get a good picture of this person's exposure to pollution, how much pollution this person inhaled. Then we can have a better idea. For example, there are many questions can be answered. One question is, does exposure to this pollutant give you this outcome? If it does, how strong the impact will be? Or that, should we care or not? If we see a strong impact, maybe something needs to be done. For example, let's say there's no concrete evidence, if we see, for example, exposure to some sort of, I don't know, a teeny particles can give you a big jump of, giving birth to a teeny baby with a very low birth weight, with a severe birth defects. Maybe you should better protect the mothers because, we know this association exists and we want to have healthy baby, we want to protect the mother. So it has significant policy implications. So not only that, capturing how people move around has significant impacts, not only in the air pollution field, but in many other fields, transportation planning, a bunch of different health fields. It's a very, very useful data set.
Well, thank you very much for explaining to us the importance of tracking how people move in and out of indoor and outdoor spaces. As we transition to new fuel economies, we'll want to be able to track this information as well. And if you don't mind, I'm going to link a few of your papers in the description box for people to read at their leisure.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And with that being said, you're obviously conducting interesting and great research, and you have people there to help you in the form of your postdocs and students. So can you tell us about how or what your best practices are for managing a research group that may be full of people from different parts of the world?
Sure. So I have to admit that my group isn't a big group, so my experience is limited, I have to say, compared to some other major players who has dozens of people in their group. So I can only speak from my experience. I have interacted with like several dozen different students, including all the way from high school to postdocs. So they come from different backgrounds. Many come from different majors, actually. I have a student from electrical engineering, computer science, public admin, from all kinds of different majors. So my experience is that the biggest lesson I learned is basically be flexible. The reason I'm saying this is because sometimes I just assume people know stuff, but because they come from a different background, they don't. It makes perfect sense, but actually at that time I don't know too much about it. And sometimes students are shy. Just give you one example. I have this wonderful and undergrad student I recruited from one of my class. She's one of the best, one of the brightest. So I actually assigned her an important task, which is to run the motor vehicle emission simulator model. You know that model. I was an assumption because she's gonna pick up her things very quickly, and it turns out she's having a lot of difficulties, but she's too shy to talk to me, even too shy to talk to some of the students. So although I think she did a wonderful job, but I can tell she feel like she didn't perform well. That makes me feel really bad. So I guess that what I'm trying to say is that students come from different backgrounds, and their knowledge is sometimes it can be surprising because it's just very different level of knowledge on different topics. So that's my biggest experience. So another experience is quite interesting, very interesting, is that I found, even say people from different culture, they have different, I would say, uh, you know, schedules. So, for example, I have one colleague who needs to leave every Friday at a certain time to pray. I don't know that. So I was like, why? What's going on? And he's like, oh, that's because of my religious, schedule. So that opened my eyes. So that's kind of another very interesting experience. But I do personally respect that.
Oh, that's awesome. Well,
So,
thank you for bringing up those stories. And I think what I learned from that, and possibly what other listeners can learn, is that we as faculty and as advisors, we're um, adapting on the fly to the needs
yeah,
of our advisees. Yeah,
yes, exactly.
yeah, yeah. So thank you. And in the same spirit of adaptation, what do you hope to achieve in the next 10 years in your research program or even as an academic administrator? And so this is not to scoop any of your big ideas, but can you give us an idea of where you see your lab in the next 10 years?
Sure. So research-wise, in my research program-wise, what I'm hoping to achieve is next 10 years is basically a bunch of different. I have a bunch of different things that I wanted to do. But I was particularly inspired and actually by Dr. Ron Cohen's work at Berkeley about the beacon network. So that's what I strive to be, to be honest. Well, so what I want to do is because I work on air quality management. So what I really want to do is basically I want to further design some advanced algorithms based on the sensor networks we're operating here at Orlando. I hope to be able to provide near real-time emission information. And that's a tremendously difficult task, as you're aware. So, yeah, that's what I strive to be research-wise. And for that goal to happen, there's a lot of work. The first is basically better sensor networks. That alone is a big challenge. The other one is advanced algorithm. I was thinking about some statistical and machine learning algorithm, whatever, but to achieve that goal. I don't have a concrete idea yet, as you can tell. I'm working toward that. For administrator, I would say my goal would be I'm currently doing some editor works for some journals, a few journals. Um, my goal is basically it's quite simple to be more responsive. And the reason I'm saying this is because sometimes we all submit journals, articles to different, submit papers to different journals, and find reviewers get them published. That's an extremely important task. Because of my time limitation, sometimes it takes me a long time to handle the publications. And that's, some authors not too happy with it, which I absolutely don't understand. I just hope I can have more time in that. I can spend more time to basically to give everybody a speedy cycle. So do not keep them waiting.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your honesty and vulnerability there. Um, it has become extremely difficult to turn around reviews,
Yeah,
especially from the early career point of view. Our time has been stretched and we've been a little bit under stress due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I just want to encourage everyone listening that we'll get through this. And our turnaround times on papers will improve, hopefully. Yeah. Well, excellent. Thank you for telling us about your background. And, another reason why I invited you here is to better understand from your perspective about how to navigate being an international student in the US and perhaps considering getting permanent residency. So, in this part of the conversation, I'll start off by asking you to please describe the process of obtaining a visa to study and then perhaps remain in the US after those studies. Thank you.
sure. So uh, from my personal, I got my green card actually through this program called national interest waiver. It's if you can look it up, it's an NIW national interest waiver. So green card, there are several different categories. So I'm not a immigration lawyer myself, so I can only very like from a very high level give a brief summary of it. So for most students in academia and research in academia, most of the people they when they go through it's called EB1 or EB2. So in EB1, you have different category, EB1A, EB1B, EB2, you have EB2NIW, which is what I went through. And, because everybody's situation is different. So I would say if one student, one researcher wanted to get the green card, it's extremely important to, from very early on, understand what are these programs, what's the differences, which one fits them better. And planning very early. So and it could take a long time, and the situation changes very fast. For example, I submitted my initial application in 2014, and I got my green card actually last year. So it's a long process, but that's just how it is.
Well, very good. So understanding the different programs,
Yes.
and so the visa issue, or sorry, the visa process for entering the US to study, that's pretty transparent as well, or
Yes.
not?
Well, it is quite transparent. So sorry, I should say that visa entering the United States is quite different. So the most students enter US in F1 visa category. So I know there's a lot of jargon, but it's just that I don't think there is a full spell out term for that, but it's just F1 visa status. Some researchers enter US through J1, which is exchange scholars, and very few use H1B, which is a temporary worker visa. So it's rather complicated because different programs have different requirements. For example, J1, if you want to pursue, when you enter US in J1, if you want to pursue a green card, then there is some other additional requirement. H1B, there's no such requirement, but you have additional requirement. It's rather complicated issue. So that's why I just say my advice would be if someone wants interest in pursuing a green card, it's extremely important to know about the differences to the minute detail. Actually, there are plenty of articles online. Just do a quick search, you find a lot of articles discussing those tremendous amount of information over there.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for those tips. And if I could gather something really important, it's to start early. These processes take a long time.
Yes.
Yeah. And so the next question that I have is, what, if any, were the unexpected challenges that you faced along your permanent residency journey, your career journey here in the US?
So the biggest challenge would be with my family. One thing I didn't realize is that, say, when I submit my application, there are two steps. The first step is your application. The second step is final adjustment to the status. So when you submit the second step, application document for the second step, you're not allowed to leave US because if you leave, it's considered withdrawal, automatic withdrawal. So I have to stay here. But the thing with that is that if you stay here, and that process could take a long time. So for me, it taking me about 3 to 4 years. And during that time, I'm not allowed to leave, which is very interesting. So another thing would be is that it's unexpected fluctuations in waiting time. So for the processing time from the immigration services depends on which category you are. It varies, and the status change every single month. And sometimes they could get your process within. If someone is lucky, you can get your document processed in 1 month. It happens. If you're not lucky, you could have to wait about 8 years, something like that. It happens to before your document, your application can be processed. So that was somewhat unexpected. Somewhat unexpected. I know that it fluctuates, but I don't know it can go up just so much, especially when the political climate changes, the processing time just changes all the time, go up and down, go up and down all the time. So that's another reason, my tip is just plan early because you never know what's going to happen.
Thank you. Thank you for that reminder to
And no problem.
just start early and that the process fluctuates. And so lastly, in this conversation about making that transition to study in the US and perhaps obtain permanent residency, if you could go back and give yourself some advice as a new graduate student at USF, what would that be in terms of making your transition a bit smoother?
Sure. So if I were to give suggestions, I would say I would put mostly two suggestions. The first suggestion is publish more. So, and it is true because when as a graduate student, I like doing work. I really like crunching the data, running the models, doing analysis. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. But writing is boring. So I don't like writing at all. And it's a big mistake. I have to say that it's a big mistake. So there are people always saying if you don't write it down, if you don't publish, it does not exist, and that's very true. So that's probably the biggest suggestion I would give to to a young and naive me at U South Florida. You have to write. I mean, even until nowadays, I still have like 2 or 3 papers I didn't even put it in writing. I did a lot of work, lots and lots of work, but it's just such a shame that I didn't put it into a journal paper. So that's probably the biggest one, and it helps too. It helps with the green card applications. So the second question is the second suggestion I would say basically is, well, plan early. So I've repeated myself several times again.
Okay, so what was your second one?
The second one is basically plan early.
For everything.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
because things could change quickly.
Okay. Plan early, publish often.
Yes.
You heard it from Professor Yu. So thank you very much for telling us about your best practices and your experiences in regard to your career in navigating permanent residency. And so you guys know what time it is. It is time to go under the hood and talk about some of the sticky things that often go undiscussed when it comes to being an academic, especially in STEM. And we thank you for coming on and talking about these issues. And so with that, my first question is in regard to your experience at Pacific Northwest National Lab. So what types of challenges, if any, did you face as an international researcher in a federal national lab?
So that actually, to be frankly, I didn't face substantial challenges at National Lab. There are a few challenges. First challenge is national labs are quite different from universities. University open, so you have a lot of freedom, but not at national labs. It makes sense because, for example, at the PNNL, I was at the engineering, the environmental building. Right next to the environmental building is national security building, and you're doing nuclear stuff in there. So, not clearly I'm not allowed to go in there. So I didn't notice this until a few months later, to be honest. It's a little bit embarrassing. But, you have different security clearances, and they take security, both cyber security and physical security, extremely seriously. For example, one of my colleagues just downloaded one of the dictionary software on work computer, and actually counterintelligence department dropped by and pick up the PC in a few minutes. That's how they take that seriously. So that's quite eye-opening experience, I would say. But overall, they didn't give a lot of. I would say working there didn't face a lot of tremendous challenges. They accommodate researchers very well, actually. So it's quite a good experience over there.
That's great. That's good to know. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay. And so the next thing I'm going to talk about or ask you about are your experiences during the peak of quarantine in regard to
Mm.
COVID-19. And so we obviously saw a terrible upswing in hate crimes against people of Eastern Asian descent. So, how did you manage during those times in regard to your mental health and safety, especially in regard to your family here in the US?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It's an important topic. So COVID it's just something that we never went through before, and it's quite challenging. We've experienced it. Both me and my colleague, my family and colleague, experienced this. So my colleague, when he was just on UCF campus, some student even throw soda at them. And for example, my family, when we go to hiking in a local trail and we have people passing by and start cursing at us, it happens. Um, and sadly, many people they don't experience it, they don't think it exists, but it does exist. So you do see a surge of this hostile behavior towards Asian descendants. So my what we have been doing is basically stay strong and try to stay positive because this is a temporary thing, and people are angry, and we experience a lot of different things during COVID, so they are angry, and sometimes they take the wrong outlet. So um, we do is basically even among us, we try to basically stay positive, think positively. We know people are good. Generally, people are good. Sometimes you cannot just because of few bad apples and just disregard the entire batch, right? So uh, yeah, so basically that's how we go with it. Sorry, it's not a lot of information, but we just try to stay strong, stay positive.
Well, uh, thank you, Haofei, and I am terribly sorry to
Yeah,
hear
no
about
worries.
those experiences. And we talked throughout the quarantine, and you were constantly, all of my friends from East Asia were constantly on my mind during that period. Um,
Thanks.
and I will say that I vehemently denounced the crimes committed by Black people against Asian people during the COVID pandemic. I am against that, and I'm going to make that known here on this platform, even though I talk about it on Twitter as well.
Thanks.
So I applaud your courage. All right. And so thank you for touching on that sticky subject because we know that xenophobia is rampant in the US. The next thing I want to ask you about is in relation to a recent preprint that was published or disseminated by Dr. Christine Yifeng Chen about racial funding gaps at the National Science Foundation. And so the paper got into the statistics about relative funding rates and how the relative funding rate on average is the worst for people of Asian that categorize themselves as Asian in the proposal applications. So the paper didn't really talk about why that may be happening to this group of researchers. So can you give us your thoughts on why you think there's a pretty severe relative funding disproportionality when it comes to people that identify as Asian?
Thanks. This is just like that. This is under the hood issue. So not a lot of people talk about this, but I do think people need to talk about it. The statistics is there, but we don't have a lot of data. Like exactly what is going on, we don't have a lot of information to dissect this issue. Um, so I can, personally, I can only speak from my own experience, from some anecdotal experiences, I would say. So overall, I do have to say NSF is relatively, among all the other funding agencies, NSF relatively equal. Um, and relatively, of course, you see this issue, right? Um, although the exact reason, underlying reason is not immediately clear, but I do think I would highly suspect if the managers are really intentionally doing this. I know the managers, they are trying, the program manager at NSF, they're trying to balance different topics. So, if this topic got too hot, the funding rate may be a little lower. They're trying to balance different, their research portfolios from different branches. So, just to take a guess over there, maybe the Asian descendant were more interested in the hot topics. Maybe that's why I dropped it down a little bit. Another reason may be writing issue. So my personal experience is that many colleagues, including me myself, because English is our not mother tongue, so our writing can have some room for improvement. Maybe that's another reason, but of course it's both from our side. Exactly what happened from NSF side, that's without really a lot of data, it's pretty difficult to guess. But I do hope, I personally do hope that this situation could go away. Also, NSF, during the review criteria, the speaker mentioned that writing shouldn't be judged during the review, judged heavily during the review. But I'm assuming some revision would take that into account. Again, anecdotal experiences. So it's just my guess. It's a complicated topic. I hope we have more studies, like we have more data from NSF and more statistical analysis to figure out what exactly is going on with this.
Well, thank you so much for weighing in on that. So you've cited perhaps not a conflict, but a balancing of interests with funding and just a tendency toward what a subset of researchers may be interested in. And so you pointed out some challenges with writing, of course, in a second language. So thank you for weighing in on that, and I'm pretty sure that the authors of the preprint will appreciate your perspective.
But I do want to mention that this is just anecdotal because I really don't have data to support myself. It's just some of my own experiences.
Absolutely. But the more we talk about it, the more we can get to the bottom of it.
Yes.
Okay. And with that, this has been a really interesting conversation. I thank you for your time, and I wanted to just ask a final question. If you have any final words of advice for other international people that are studying in the U.S., visa holders and aspiring permanent residency holders who want to study and work in the U.S., do you have any additional advice or have anything to say that we haven't covered?
I would say the most thing we already covered already. I would say the most important thing, United States is, without doubt, you can without doubt, you can say that it's one of the great country, right? It's a country of freedom, and a lot of people want to stay here. That makes perfect sense. I would say my experience would be work hard. So this is a place where if you really work hard, you could shine, because people will see that, and you will shine, and your effort will be appreciated. So I think that's extremely, extremely, extremely important.
And there you have it, y'all. You heard it first from Professor Yu. If you work hard, you can shine here. I agree. Yeah. So with that, thank you, Haofei, for joining the Under the Hood community and telling us about your experiences. I am very grateful for your vulnerability and your honesty.
No problem. No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And this has been, once again, episode 13 of Under the Hood, and we'll catch you in the next one.